Good evening, everyone. I'm Nathan at the European People's Party, and on behalf of the EPP, welcome to another episode of EPP Family Talks. Over these past several weeks, it's been our pleasure to welcome EPP leaders from throughout our political family to hear from them the ideas and projects they've been working on. This evening, it is our privilege to be able to speak with First Vice President of the European Parliament, Ms. Mairead McGuinness. So we are just trying to connect with her now. I think she's just joined our session, so we'll just try and invite her now to chat with us. And I think this very one never knows. Welcome to all of our viewers, to Roger, to Oliver.
Hi.
Hi, Ms. McGuinness.
Sorry for frightening
Vice
you at the beginning.
Welcome. It's always
Thank you.
nice to speak with you, and it's always wonderful when this, and a bit of a surprise when this works, to be honest.
Well, actually, I think we'd all been having shocks and surprises, but getting better at technology and pictures and things like that. So look, it's lovely to be with you, and we've connected, and that's a good start to the evening.
Well, indeed it is. We've just started all of these interview series by asking a very simple personal question, and that is just, how are you doing? How have you been coping? How have you been adapting during these very strange last several weeks?
Yeah, it is. It's very strange. But in fact, compared to other people, I've been adapting very well. And thank God I haven't been affected directly by COVID-19. And we're thinking this evening of the many people who have been affected, who've lost a loved one. So our family were, if you like, insulated from that grief. But of course, we knew of people who were affected. For me, it was a very strange moment when the Parliament in March sent everyone back home. And I was back home for a few days and I thought this will end very quickly and we will go back to normal. And then to realize, no, it didn't. That in fact, on Monday of this week was my first time in Brussels since March. As we got more accustomed to the technology and working remotely, we settled into a very good rhythm. And I suppose from a personal point of view, I haven't been at home for that long for some time. So it was quite nice to be at home. So when the work finished, I could go to the garden or walk the fields or be with my family, because 3 of my 4 adult children are at home with my husband during this time. So I think it took me a little bit of time to settle down, because we work at such a pace that slowing, took some time. But in fact, we have worked well. And I think the Parliament here, the administration, the President, the decisions we took as a group, the EPP, to make sure that the Parliament was working to full strength where we could, were the right decisions, because they safeguarded the health and well-being of our staff, our own health and well-being, and allowed us to be with our families at a very difficult time for Europe and indeed for the globe.
Well, having been here in Brussels for this time, for the duration, it's been really encouraging, even just in the last couple of days, to see the Parliament in particular begin to liven up, which I think is just, it's a great, even a symbolic, symbolically a powerful thing about the recovery moving forward now.
Yeah,
so you've been home, you've been working remotely, but could you give us a bit of a sense what things have been like, what things are like in Ireland itself right now?
Well, I think Ireland, like many European countries, was badly affected by this, but we planned to ensure that we had sufficient capacity in our hospitals so that people could be looked after. I think the Irish people were very compliant with what was needed to be done. So people stayed at home, they cocooned their loved ones, they did things that in normal times you would never think we were capable of doing. And I think we worked really well as a community. And I think that's one of the things we've learned from this pandemic, that with a good spirit, a country, a community can come together and do the right thing and make sure that we are all protected. I think what it also has taught us is that above all, our health is our wealth. And maybe we didn't have that message ingrained enough in our minds, but we do now. So for Ireland, we have lost, over 1,000 people, and that is really serious and very sad. For me, the saddest part is that many of our older generation who were living, those living in nursing homes, were particularly vulnerable. And I think, that has been tragic for those families, and our heart would go out to them. I think as we begin now to unwind the restrictions, we are a little bit concerned that people don't become over enthusiastic, that we don't think this is back to the way we were and that there's no need for precautions. Of course there are, and indeed in this Parliament we are wearing masks other than when we speak. We are being very cautious about distance, and it's the same in Ireland. We're having a debate now about masks, whether people should wear them, and I think I would encourage people to wear a mask. If it does nothing else, it reminds us that the pandemic, which is invisible, is there. So it's a good reminder, and it is respectful to other people who you might meet. So generally, I think we have coped well as a country, and the leadership shown by Taoiseach Leo Varadkar and our Health Minister Simon Harris has been very strong. And it's been a tough time for anyone in political life, because these are decisions which have not faced other leaders in the past. This type of pandemic is not, we haven't experienced in recent history. So we had to listen to the experts and react and act quickly. And I think we did that.
I want to stay on the subject of Ireland, if I might, but before I get to the question, just another warm welcome to our viewers, in particular, one of our CDU chapters, our colleague Victoria, whom I saw, and our fellow Fine Gael friend, Mr. Neil Richmond.
Okay.
So my next question is, would you have any update for us on the formation of a government in Ireland right now?
Well, hi to everyone. I think Neil Richmond might know a little more than I do, because he's in Ireland and I'm just in Brussels. So look, the talks are, I suppose, at a difficult and important phase. I mean, it is extraordinary that we had an election, we have had a pandemic, we had to have a government that continued to make tough decisions, and we're allowed the capacity to do that within the political system. And we now have three parties trying to come together to form a government. But it's a government that has to last. And I think that's why these negotiations are very difficult, because for the first time we would see the Fine Gael party joining up with Fianna Fáil, and many of my parents and grandparents would never have thought that possible. We also see that the Greens are part of the discussion, and there are many demands being made. But for me, the crucial issue is that you need a government that is strong enough to build a recovery. Because at the moment we're dealing with the public health pandemic, and rightly we are doing all of the things to support SMEs, our industry, our societies, our charities. We have to do all of those things. But at some point we're going to have to look at how do we continue doing that in a way that allows the economy to rebuild, to get young people in particular back to work, because many would have lost jobs in the tourism sector. And I'm not sure today what happened in the negotiations, but I know the last time I had a conversation just late yesterday evening, things were a little bit, difficult and fraught, as you might expect at this point in the negotiations. We had perhaps hoped that by the weekend there might be an announcement, but I'm not so sure what the latest is. So perhaps if Neil Richmond is listening in, he might send a little message. But I hope that, that there is enough bravery and enough courage amongst those leaders and those involved in the talks to do the right thing for the country, and then to do the right thing for the European Union. Because I think across all of our member states, what we need now are solid leaders that can give leadership and show strength at a very difficult time for the European Union, at a time when the pandemic is still about. And, my biggest concern is that even if Europe succeeds in dampening this awful pandemic, the rest of the world has its difficulties. And the one thing we have all learned is that none of us are an island, even though I live on one. Ireland is that. But actually, we cannot, secure ourselves unless the world is secure. And I think that's been the message from the WHO, that once anyone is at risk, all of us are at risk. So I hope when the government talks are ongoing, that will be in the back of their minds of everybody. The only other option, if the talks don't work, is another election. And if that is the case, then we'll have to see how we can do that given the circumstances of the pandemic. But the good news today from my mind is that the Taoiseach was able to say that he expects to unwind some of the restrictions earlier. And I think those who have long hair that they didn't normally have or whatever, that want to get to a hairdresser's, will be very pleased about that. So will the hairdressers, actually.
Well, on that note of the wider implications of this pandemic, let's talk about the EU level and several issues. There are several issues I'd like to ask you about there. And the first one is one which is similarly timely, similarly crucial, and similarly relevant for the Republic of Ireland, and that is the ongoing negotiations between the EU and the United Kingdom. They've just finished the fourth round of negotiations. There's a deadline looming the end of this month. How do you assess the state of play there?
Oh gosh, I'm glad you actually brought it up, because to some extent Brexit has been pushed to the side because we're dealing with this public health pandemic, but it hasn't gone away. And I'm mindful of what Michel Barnier, who's very wise and an able negotiator, his message is that he's not optimistic, but he believes that we can reach an agreement with the United Kingdom if the United Kingdom comes to the table knowing exactly what it wants, and that we can actually work together without the European Union conceding on our core issues. And you know, this issue of Brexit has dominated my life since the referendum in 2016. It dominated it for many reasons, but in particular, I represent the counties along the invisible border with Northern Ireland. So many times I would have been on British media explaining the sensitivities of that border. And what's been wonderful here in this Parliament is the moments where I'm chairing or I'm in the chamber and a colleague from another member state stands up and speaks about the Irish question. So the support has been really important. So two issues here. One is we need to make sure that the withdrawal agreement is implemented. And we believe that the United Kingdom will act in good faith and do exactly that, implement the withdrawal agreement. It's in all of our interests that we use the precious time left to us to negotiate as equal partners a future relationship. But it is a very unusual time. We are actually unpicking the best possible option, which is the UK remaining in the single market and customs union, to move to some other place where the UK wants sovereignty and independence, but where Europe wants to protect the single market and the customs union. So this could go either way. And next week, just to those who are watching, there will be a very big debate here in the Parliament about Brexit. You will hear a lot about what's happening or indeed what's not happening. If you look at the fishing sector, and I know lots of fishermen around the Europe are looking at this, we have no movement on that sector. So again, I think Brexit is going to become an issue. It will be higher up the agenda, certainly on our role here as MEPs next week. And from an Irish point of view, we will be watching for exactly the same issues as all of our colleagues. We need a fair deal.
Something else you've been working on, in addition to Brexit these past few years, is the issue of agriculture, particularly the European Union's common agricultural policy. My understanding is you yourself come from a farming family. One thing I was really struck by just looking at your Twitter feed is the way you talk about agriculture, not only in terms of food security, which to me anyway seems to make kind of an intuitive sense, but also in terms of issues like biodiversity and sustainability. Could you explain maybe what the link between these issues is? And do you see a special urgency here between thinking these issues now that this pandemic is upon us?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few points there. Firstly, on the pandemic, I think it's been quite interesting to see how people have gotten more in tune with nature, because they weren't in their cars or on planes, they couldn't travel, so they had to hear and listen to what was happening around them. And I've been really impressed to see, even on social media, a lot of talk about that. I had the great benefit of being in the countryside, so when I finished my work in the evening, I could, enjoy Mother Nature at its best. When I'm in the city in Brussels, I realised the importance of green architecture in urban areas. So that's the first point. When you ask about the common agriculture policy and biodiversity and these wider questions, it seemed to me that somewhere along the line, we allowed something happen which has not been good. We allowed production and environment to be separated. And we now need to reconnect them. And if you've noticed this on my Twitter feed or social media, it's been a very deliberate strategy of mine to try and say to those who would be skeptical about farmers and their interest in the environment and biodiversity, to say, actually, farmers are hugely interested, but some of our policies have not helped them in that regard. And I've tried to persuade farmers that, look, you can't keep doing what you've always done. Sometimes you need to change direction as the policy changes. There will be demands made around climate change, around biodiversity. Food security will not go away, and we have to keep that in mind. So why I try and integrate these is to say to environmentalists and farmers, get together. Stop fighting with each other on Twitter, because the noise isn't helping. But what would really help is to show examples of what's working. And can I just say, there's one fantastic example under the hashtag Farmers for Nature in Ireland. They're doing incredible work quietly. There are other groups, conservation, agriculture, doing incredible things with crops and with climate measures already happening, because we are going to have to bring in more of those measures. And I think if we have best cases or good examples to show, I think it's really important. But there is another reason I do it. I get a great sense of calm when I'm out and about, just listening to wildlife and nature and watching trees. And I get a great sense of sadness when I see, in some cases, certainly in my own country, where people will spray along a hedgerow just to kill vegetation. And there's no reason to do that. And in fact, when you kill vegetation, you can kill other wildlife as well. And maybe what we need to do is look at everything we're doing now, everything we're doing, how we work, live and play, and say, is this sustainable? Can we do it a better way? Can we do it in a way that actually does no harm? And that's why I hope that even this chat that I'm having with you will encourage people who want to talk about this to engage literally with one another, rather than sometimes we're, at cross purposes, but actually we want to get to the same place.
Let me just pick up on that note of wanting to do things even better now that we're in such a challenging situation. One of the things that comes to my mind when I think of you and your work in the Parliament is you're presiding over the hemicycle. One of your jobs as first Vice President of the European Parliament is to preside over sessions of the plenary, which gives you really a bird's eye view of your fellow representatives and of just everything that's going on. And so I wanted to ask you kind of a big bird's eye view question, and that is, in the midst of this pandemic, what do you think the EU has been doing well? How has it gotten things right? And what would the next one or two really important concrete steps be for moving to the next phase of recovery?
Okay, well, I think after an initial difficult start, because there was a lot of concern as to how we deal with this and individual countries were doing their own thing, I think there was a very quick realization that, gosh, we have to work better together. And I think the Commission, under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, did that when she came forward with a strong response, both on the medical equipment and then on the huge recovery package. So I think that was important that Europe did that, because in the beginning there was a sense that wasn't happening. And indeed in some member states that were really badly affected by the pandemic, and our hearts would go out to those countries and colleagues. They did feel a little bit left behind. And I think, again, to acknowledge that Europe wasn't just 100% ready to deal with this is a very good thing. In terms of the next steps, it's clear to me that we need to learn lessons and learn them fast. And the first lesson is that, as I said to you, health is wealth. And therefore, we need to look at investing more in public health. And that was not something that would have been said previously, but you learn sometimes the hard road. Secondly, we know that at the global level, we are seeing more disintegration than integration, and that the one hope is the European Union. And I think the voice of Europe when it comes to, pulling funding together for a vaccine was very important. The voice of Europe in ensuring that medical equipment went where it was needed was hugely important. But I think we're going to have to ask ourselves questions about the supply of pharmaceuticals, security of supply of medical equipment. But I hope we don't do it in a way where I hear other global players saying that it's all about independence and sovereignty, because I don't think that's the European message. It's more about security for our citizens and helping them at the global level. But there are going to be difficult conversations between us, not only as countries, but in this Parliament, about how we do that. But we can't go back to the way we were. And I think Europe always reacts to crisis and grows. Sometimes it's a difficult growth path and a difficult, roadway, but we never ignore what has happened. And we should never ignore a good crisis. And I don't mean that in the way it might sound, but I think we have to be sure that should this happen again, and there's no guarantee that we may not have a second wave or another crisis like this, that we are better prepared and that we have sufficient, if you like, capacity in our systems to cope.
I think those elements of solidarity and hope that you mentioned are so important. And that brings me to the final policy-related question that I wanted to ask you, and that is about another one of your responsibilities as first Vice President of the Parliament, and that is in the implementation of Article 17 of the Lisbon Treaty, which I think many people might not know by the number, but what that means is, and I'm going to just read this here, it is a legal basis for an open, transparent, and regular dialogue between the EU institutions and churches, religious associations, and philosophical and non-confessional organizations, which I think must be a fascinating opportunity. Could you tell us what this work involves? And maybe what I would really like to ask you is, are you hopeful doing this work? Does it give you a sense that despite all the strain we see now the world is under, the new challenges, the broken systems, is there a sense that you have that there is a chance we can move forward together in good faith, despite being from different backgrounds, different faiths?
Yeah, I mean, we have to have that hope that we can work together, whatever our backgrounds are. But that work under Article 17, I had heard of it before I had responsibility for it, and I didn't understand the depth of it. And really, it's so important because it allows us to listen to the wisdom of churches and humanists about the way we are, and allows them input into our policies. And I've tried more and more to make sure that our committee colleagues were involved in this dialogue. And I found it hugely enlightening. I've learned things, frankly, that I did not know. And I think the day you're learning is a very good day. But I've also, I hope, been able to bring a sense of balance sometimes between the discussions between religious groups and humanists. And we try to have a regular dialogue. In fact, I'm having one very shortly, but I'm going to be doing it online because I'm really interested to hear how churches and faith communities and humanists have been reacting to this crisis, because churches have been closed. And I think technology has allowed those who wanted to continue to have access to services, religious services on a weekly basis, to access it on a daily basis, and churches are learning that. So that's going to be interesting. But also I think sometimes churches and humanists are not grounded in the daily, if you like, day-to-day issues that we are, and might pull us away from those to think of the wider question. And one of the bigger questions is that at the moment I'm looking at climate law, and I'm the shadow rapporteur for the EPP on this, and that's really looking at 2050. I may not be around for 2050. In fact, I doubt if I will, but I hope that the work I do and those around me will make it a better place, the whole, European continent, but also the wider world by 2050. And we have to make those changes today. And if you listen to even His Holiness the Pope have spoken about climate change and about justice and solidarity and all of these things, as all religious leaders do, as the humanists do. So yeah, it's been good to have that dialogue. And I've tried, as I say, to strengthen it through our committees. And I've been really happy that my colleagues across the political groups have been engaged in that.
Well, we certainly hope you'll be around in 2050 and still involved. Thank you so much for your perspective on these issues. I have a couple of minutes left in this interview, and I wanted to ask you a couple of more fun, more personal, more informal kind of questions, as we've asked with many of our leaders, to help our viewers get to know you a little bit better. And the first one is there a historical figure whom you found particularly helpful or inspirational to consider during these past several months?
I'm going to answer that in an unusual way. I was influenced politically by my political party, Fine Gael, in the 70s, when the leader at the time, Garret Fitzgerald, encouraged women to get involved, because we were invisible up to that. And therefore, I place the fact that I'm here in politics in the European Parliament to that movement of the 1970s and the early 80s. And to the strong women like Monica Barnes, like Nora Owen, like Nuala Fennell, those women who were, if you like, leaders because they were first in the task of being women in politics. So they would give me courage. I still think we have a lot to learn and a lot to do. And again, going back to the pandemic, if you look at the role of women, the carers, those with children, their lives, quite difficult in this pandemic. So we've a lot of issues to solve around that. So they would have given me inspiration to be here. And I hope that they're a little bit proud of that I followed in their footsteps.
And one final question, is there a book or a film or a series you've recently read or watched which you would recommend?
Well, actually, I haven't read a book since the pandemic, which is extraordinary because I'd have read a lot up to that. Because I've been reading a lot about climate, but equally I've been using the time to be outdoors. But I did read, and I think lots of people would have read the recent novel of Where the Crawdads Sing, which is quite an end to it. I've tried to convince some of my family to read it. They're not impressed with the beginning, but I keep saying stick with it. The end is, not what I had anticipated.
Could you tell us the author and just the basic setting?
The author is, remind me here, we've forgotten because they're just here in the background. No, Google, you'll find everything's on Google. I should remember, but I don't. But I remember the ending of that.
And the setting?
Delia Owens. So I hope you got that. Those of you who are interested, you might hate it, so don't take my judgment for it. But it's interesting that I've been not reading books as much as I had prior to it. So maybe I've been thinking more, reflecting more. That's no harm.
Well, indeed, no harm at all. And we're compiling here a virtual library of all the different recommendations we're getting. So I think even we might even have a video already out just in the last day or so. So Ms. Mairead McGuinness, first Vice President of the European Parliament, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Thanks for the work you're doing on behalf of the EPP. It's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Pleasure. Listen, thank you so much. Lovely to see you, Nathan. Hope we can see each other in real life sometime soon.
I hope so. All the best to your family as well.
Cheers and good evening to everyone watching. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye. To all of our viewers, thanks for joining us. Please join us again next time. We'll be speaking tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock Central European Time, live via Facebook with Mr. Andrius Kubilius, former Prime Minister of Lithuania and the European Parliament's co-president of the Euronest Parliamentary Assembly. Have a great evening and see you then.